While AB InBev hires diverse people, as a large business, they must ensure that each and every new hire is a great cultural fit. And in fact, CEO Carlos Brito, whenever he makes a corporate speech, he references at least one of what AB InBev calls its 10 principles. So no matter for what types of jobs you're applying at AB InBev, there will be at least a few questions about these 10 principles. So next I'm going to give you some more insight into what each of them really means with some examples, and actually I'll group them into sections, so it will be easier to go through them. So the whole management philosophy at AB InBev is driven by this concept of a dream, and Carlos Brito sees this dream as a more efficient way to organize the organization as compared to just calling it as a core value, because this dream is used as a main method to motivate groups of people and essentially high-performing teams. Also interesting to note here is that Carlos Brito sees a company as basically a group of great people. So long as you have the correct policies in place and you use them to motivate those people, you do have a strong shot at keeping this lead. Also important to see here is that they see this leadership position as a journey instead of a destination. So in other words, you can never reach that dream, but you could always do your best and re-emphasize around your principles to make sure that at least you're on the wrong path. And maybe finally an example here that Carlos Brito gave with an athlete, that if you don't sufficiently motivate an athlete, for example, to jump to a certain height, if you put the bar too low, then there will be no motivation to get over that bar. But instead, if you put it reasonably high, then that athlete will do his best and try to pass it, and then you put it higher and higher. And this is the mindset that people at AB InBev should favor. Now, the other ingredient to achieve that dream that I mentioned in the first principle is to have the best people. And for this, you must really have to have processes in place to motivate those people. Because another example from CEO is the only thing that you cannot really copy from a beer company in the beer industry is actually the people, because if you launch a new product, your competitors will eventually, if successful, they could clone it in a matter of months. But having great people, that's a lot harder to copy. And another reason why having great people is so important is because great people attract more of the same, and great people in great teams challenge themselves to basically to perfection, to these types of behaviors. Now, by contrast, if you have average people, they also attract more of the same, and they will eventually like to institute smaller goals that can easily be reached, and this will actually result in an average company. And last but not least to this principle is that AB InBev hires quite a lot from universities, because they believe in forming people from the early beginnings, and this mentality is their best shot to achieve this goal of hiring and retaining great people. The next two principles are around ownership and leadership by example. And to give an example here from Carlos Brito again, if you rent a car, your sense of ownership is a lot smaller than if you own it. So if you rent it, you're a lot more likely to go over speed bumps, and it's quite unheard of to get a rental car to a car wash. And as some people say, don't be gentle, it's a rental. So this is the contrast that allows to better highlight that sense of ownership that's highlighted in this principle. And maybe another example here is one of managing company money. And for instance, if you have that sense of ownership, you will more likely choose to spend your company money as your own money. So instead of just picking the most expensive hotel, you will most likely get a more value balanced approach here. So I believe these two examples are quite good to make you get a feel of what this ownership mentality is all about. And of course, leadership by example goes without saying that by behaving this way, you also lead by example to within your own group and organization. This next principles is actually quite easy to explain. It's focusing around zero complacency and basically keep going towards reaching that level of excellence and perfection. And how you do this? Well, you do this by essentially choosing a few fights, to pick up a few areas of interest and focus on them and do them really well, because as Carlos Brito says as well, you cannot focus on too many things at once, so you should definitely pick up your fights, just 2 or 3 up to 5 things that you could do, and do them really well, as opposed to having a very vague and general approach. Common sense and simplicity are usually preferred as to unnecessary complications, and to give an example here, when you have a presentation, when somebody has to do a presentation for you and they start developing on those slides, and maybe they have many slides with different colors and many complex charts, essentially, that's not a particularly good sign when it comes to their ability to synthesize, to make things simple and natural to understand. So you should have this inclination towards simplicity, and keep in mind that it tends to be that the simple things are often the most relevant and have the best impact. This next principle is quite important for AB InBev, that is the ability to manage costs tightly. And to give an example from Carlos Brito here, if we associate a company with a black box, the only way that you could make deposits into that black box is through sales revenue. But on the other hand, the way that you could make withdrawals from it would be either through the operating cost that is running the cost of a business, either through the investment, making investments in that business. And the only fixed known numbers from these equations are the running costs and the investment costs. So Carlos Brito strongly believes in the concept of AB InBev being a frugal company. In other words, if you manage those two fixed costs tightly, this is the best way to ensure that you stay fit, because the future is quite uncertain and it's only the fittest that will survive. Also important here is the idea that they see themselves as a meritocracy. In other words, they spend money responsibly during the year, so in order to give dividends and at the end of the year. So these are the two main elements that you should be aware of and be able to reflect throughout your interviewing process. And finally, to never take shortcuts and to always favor a culture of hard work is also something very dear to AB InBev. And they actually say that we love owners, but we hate professionals and executives. And why would they have such an approach? Well, because they believe that an executive has the main goal of getting a job just in order to build a greater CV, when by contrast an owner takes pride in their job and essentially contributes day by day to the success to the success of a company, and also feels that sense of a higher purpose. Now, also important to know here is that AB InBev therefore chooses to hire the vast majority of its workforce through university recruiting programs. So they see these elements of this ownership culture as the main element to drive that first principle of the dream.